The rifle cracked. One shot. Then silence. The man who had stolen everything from Arabella Ashworth fell backward, his eyes wide with shock. The crowd gasped. The sheriff reached for his weapon but stopped when he saw who stood there. Red bandana, dark beard, eyes like winter ice. Arabella watched from the window of the jail, tears finally streaming down her face as justice arrived in a cloud of gunpowder smoke. This story is a work of fiction, crafted by AI. But the injustice it depicts, that's older than memory. But to understand how it came to this, we need to go back to the moment it all started. Let me take you back. The hammer struck the wood, again and again. Each blow echoed through the town square of Cripple Creek. Men in dirty work clothes nailed the final plank into place. They built a gallows, right there in the middle of Main Street, for all to see. Arabella Ashworth sat in her cell. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap. Her back was straight. Her eyes were open. But she wasn't looking at the walls. She was staring at nothing. The fear had left her days ago. Now there was only resignation, a quiet acceptance of what was coming. Outside, the townspeople went about their business. They glanced at the gallows as they passed. Some looked away quickly, others stared too long. No one spoke about it. No one mentioned Arabella's name. The silence was thick enough to choke on. The sheriff stood by the gallows, supervising the work. He wiped sweat from his brow with a handkerchief. His deputy watched from the porch of the jailhouse, chewing tobacco. Both men avoided looking in the direction of the cells. "She's a killer," someone muttered from the crowd. "Got what she deserved." Another man nodded. "Too bad they're waiting until tomorrow. I'd like to see it now." Arabella heard the words. They filtered through the bars, through the window, into her cell. She didn't flinch. She didn't close her eyes. She just sat there, still, like a statue waiting for the marble carver's final touch. The stranger rode into town as the sun began to set. He didn't stop at the saloon. He didn't tie his horse to the hitching post. He just sat there, watching. His gloved hands rested on his knees, his hat pulled low. The red bandana around his neck was the only color in his otherwise gray world. He watched them finish the gallows, watched the townspeople go about their business, watched the sheriff dismiss his men for the day, watched as the last nail was driven home. And then he looked at the jailhouse, looked directly at Arabella's window. Even from that distance, he could see her sitting there, still, calm. Too calm for a woman facing death in the morning. The stranger dismounted, tied his horse to the hitching post, and walked toward the jailhouse. His boots made no sound on the wooden walkway. His presence was enough to make the townspeople stop what they were doing, to stare, to whisper. He reached the jailhouse door, paused, took a breath, and pushed it open. What he found inside would change everything, and what he was about to do would make the whole town remember why justice matters. Subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? The jailhouse door creaked as the stranger stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of damp stone and old wood. Sheriff Tom Weston looked up from his desk, his hand resting near his holstered pistol. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice tight. The stranger didn't answer right away. His gaze swept across the room, taking in the barred cells, the empty chairs, the worn desk. Then his eyes settled on the sheriff. "I want to see Arabella Ashworth." Weston's jaw tightened. "She's a prisoner. Murderer. No visitors?" The stranger took a step forward. "I'm not here to socialize. I'm here to ask questions." The sheriff stood up slowly. "She's got nothing to say. The evidence is clear. She killed Silas Blackwood's business partner. Tried to take his share of the ranch? The stranger's expression didn't change. Let me see her. Weston hesitated, then nodded toward a cell at the end of the hall. 5 minutes. No more. The stranger walked down the corridor, his boots echoing in the quiet space. He stopped outside Arabella's cell. She sat on the cot, looking up at him with tired eyes. Her hands were folded in her lap, her wrists raw from the ropes that had bound her earlier. "You're here to gawk?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "No," the stranger said. "I'm here to listen." He crouched beside the bars, his face level with hers. "Tell me what happened the night of the murder." Arabella looked away. "I didn't kill anyone. I was home, alone. According to Silas Blackwood, you were seen near the victim's property that night." "He's lying," Arabella said, her voice gaining strength. "I never left my ranch. The whole thing is nonsense." The stranger studied her face. The fear was gone. Only resignation remained. But something else, too. Determination. "What was your relationship with the victim?" "None," Arabella said quickly. "I barely knew him. He was Silas's partner, that's all." "And Silas, what's your relationship with him?" Arabella's hands clenched into fists. "He's been trying to buy my land for years. My grandfather founded that ranch. It's been in my family for 3 generations. I refused to sell. Now this happens." The stranger straightened up. "What evidence do they have against you?" "A knife," Arabella said, her voice dropping. "They found it in my barn, claimed it was the murder weapon, but it wasn't mine. I've never seen that knife before in my life." The stranger nodded slowly. "And the town believes Silas's story?" "What choice do they have?" Arabella asked, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "Sheriff Weston is in Silas's pocket. The judge owes him money. The jury will do what they're told." The stranger turned as footsteps approached the cell. Sheriff Weston stood there, arms crossed. "Time's up. No more questions." The stranger stood up, his eyes meeting the sheriff's. "This isn't over." Weston smirked. "It is for her. Tomorrow at dawn. The gallows don't wait." The stranger walked out of the jailhouse, the setting sun casting long shadows across the street. He stopped and looked at the gallows they had built earlier, a symbol of justice corrupted, a warning to anyone who might speak out. He mounted his horse and rode toward the edge of town. As he left Cripple Creek behind, he thought about Arabella's story. The inconsistencies were clear to anyone who cared to look. Silas Blackwood had motive, means, opportunity, and Arabella had none. The stranger knew what he had to do. He had to find the truth before the sun rose tomorrow, because if he didn't, an innocent woman would hang for a crime she didn't commit, and another ranch would fall into the hands of a man who knew how to steal without mercy. But what he was about to uncover would change everything, and Silas Blackwood would soon learn that some men can't be bought, not with money, not with power, not with fear. Keep watching, because what this man does next is something you won't see coming. The stranger rode his horse through the dusty streets of Cripple Creek, the setting sun casting long shadows across the wooden buildings. He stopped at the edge of town, dismounted, and tied his horse to a weathered fence post. The red bandana around his neck stood out against the fading light, a splash of color in a world painted in shades of brown and gray. He walked back toward the center of town, his eyes scanning every face he passed. People avoided his gaze, quickening their pace as he approached. They knew who he was looking for, the ones who knew something, the ones who had seen something but kept quiet. The stranger stopped outside the general store. The sign above the door read, "Cavendish and Kosu." He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The bell above the door jingled softly. The store was dimly lit, Shelves lined with canned goods, tools, and fabric. A man with thinning hair and spectacles looked up from behind the counter. He wiped his hands on his apron, his eyes wide with recognition. "You're not from around here," the man said, his voice barely above a whisper. The stranger nodded. "Looking for information about the murder." The man's face paled. "I don't know anything about that." "Edmund Cavendish," the stranger said, not as a question but as a statement of fact. "The official report says you witnessed the crime scene, but you disappeared right after. Why?" Edmund's hands trembled as he reached for a cloth to polish already clean glasses. I was scared. Silas Blackwood threatened me, said something bad would happen to my family if I talked." "What did you see?" the stranger pressed, his voice low but firm. Edmund glanced nervously toward the window. "I saw two figures arguing near the victim's property. One was Silas Blackwood. The other, I couldn't make out clearly. But it wasn't Arabella Ashworth." The stranger leaned forward. "When was this?" "The night of the murder, around midnight. I was checking my store's inventory when I heard voices. I went to investigate." "And the knife?" the stranger asked. "The one they found in Arabella's barn?" Edmund shook his head. "That wasn't there that night. I know Arabella's property well. I've delivered supplies to her ranch for years. That knife wasn't hers." The stranger straightened up. "Where were you when the murder actually happened?" "I was home, in bed," Edmund said, avoiding eye contact. "I told the sheriff that, but he didn't believe me, said I was lying to protect Arabella." The stranger studied Edmund's face. The fear was genuine. The guilt was not. "Silas Blackwood has done this before, hasn't he?" Edmund's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "Ranchers disappearing, framed for crimes they didn't commit, their land suddenly changing hands." Edmund hesitated, then nodded slowly. "There were 3 others, in the last 2 years. Each time Silas ended up with their land. Each time, the accused was either executed or ran out of town before they could clear their name." The stranger's jaw tightened. "Arabella won't be the 4th. He turned to leave, but Edmund called out, "Be careful. Silas doesn't like meddlers. People who ask questions tend to disappear." The stranger paused at the door, then turned back. "Tell me something. If Arabella is executed tomorrow, who gets her ranch?" Edmund swallowed hard. "Silas Blackwood. He already has the papers drawn up, waiting for the signature." The stranger nodded. "Thank you for your honesty." He stepped back out onto the street, the general store door closing behind him. The sun had completely set now, casting the town in darkness. The stranger walked toward the saloon, his mind racing with the new information. Arabella wasn't just framed, she was targeted. Silas Blackwood had a pattern, a method. And he was about to acquire his 4th ranch through murder and deceit. The stranger entered the saloon, the noise and laughter stopping as all eyes turned to him. He ignored the stares and walked directly to the bar. "Whiskey," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. The bartender poured the drink without a word. The stranger took a sip, his eyes scanning the room. He was looking for someone else. Someone who might know more about Silas Blackwood's operation. Someone who could tell him how to stop the execution before dawn. And someone who could help him make sure Arabella Ashworth got her ranch back. But what he found next would change everything. And Silas Blackwood would soon learn that some questions are better left unanswered. The stranger stepped out of the saloon, the night air cooler than he expected. He walked toward the livery stable where he'd left his horse, his mind racing with what Edmund had revealed. 3 other ranchers, all framed by Silas Blackwood, all lost their land. The pattern was clear, too perfect to be coincidence. He stopped at the edge of town, looking back toward the jail where Arabella waited for dawn. The gallows stood like a dark promise against the starlit sky. The stranger knew he couldn't wait until morning. Something wasn't right about the timeline Edmund had described. He turned toward the Blackwood ranch, his horse moving steadily through the darkness. The closer he got, the more he noticed details that didn't add up. According to Edmund, the murder had happened around midnight, but the stranger remembered something from Arabella's cell. She'd mentioned being home alone that night, and she'd been working late on her books until well after midnight. The Blackwood ranch came into view as the moon rose higher, a large house with lights burning in several windows. The stranger tied his horse to a fence post and approached cautiously, staying in the shadows. He circled the property, looking for signs of recent activity. Near the back of the house, he found what he was looking for, a section of freshly turned earth. Not enough to bury a body, but enough to hide something important. The stranger knelt, running his hands through the soil. His fingers closed around something hard and cold. He pulled it out, a knife. Not the kind they'd claimed was found in Arabella's barn, but a different one that matched Edmund's description of what he'd seen near the victim's property. The stranger examined the knife in the moonlight. It was clean now, but he could see traces of something darker in the crevices. Blood. And not just any blood. The handle had an initial carved into it, S.B. Silas Blackwood's initials. A noise from the house made him freeze. A window slid open. Silas Blackwood's face appeared, scanning the yard. The stranger melted back into the shadows, clutching the knife. He had proof now. Evidence that would clear Arabella's name and expose Silas for the killer he was. He turned and ran back toward his horse, the weight of the knife in his hand like a promise of justice to come. The execution was still scheduled for tomorrow. But now the stranger had a plan, and Silas Blackwood was about to learn that some secrets don't stay buried forever. What he was about to do would change everything, and Arabella Ashworth would live to see another sunrise. The stranger clutched the knife in his hand, the initials S.B. clearly visible in the moonlight. He knew this was the murder weapon, the same one they claimed was found in Arabella's barn. But this one had Silas Blackwood's initials carved into the handle. The frame job was too perfect, too calculated. He turned his horse and rode back toward town, the weight of the evidence heavy in his pocket. The execution was scheduled for tomorrow at dawn. Time was running out. The stranger stopped at the edge of Cripple Creek, dismounting and tying his horse to a fence post. He needed time to think, to plan. The knife was proof, but it wasn't enough on its own. Silas would deny it, claim it was planted. The stranger needed more, something that couldn't be explained away. He remembered what Edmund had told him about the 3 other ranchers, the ones who had disappeared or been executed. Silas had acquired their lands through the same method. Frame them for murder. Take their property when they couldn't defend themselves. The stranger walked through the quiet streets, the town asleep except for a few lanterns still burning in windows. He stopped outside the sheriff's office, watching the building. Sheriff Tom Weston was Silas's puppet. The stranger knew he couldn't go through official channels. Not anymore. As he stood there, a figure emerged from the shadows. Isum. It was Edmund Cavendish, the shopkeeper. "You shouldn't be out here," Edmund whispered, looking around nervously. "Silas has men watching. They saw you at my store earlier. They know you're asking questions." The stranger pulled the knife from his pocket. "I found this at Silas's ranch, near the house, buried in fresh dirt." Edmund's eyes widened. "That's the murder weapon. I recognized it when Silas showed it to the sheriff. Claimed he found it on Arabella's property." "The initials," the stranger said. SB carved into the handle. Silas was careless or arrogant. He always thought he was above the law, Edmund said. That's why he's done this before. 3 times. Each time the rancher ended up dead or gone. Silas took their land. The stranger nodded. Arabella won't be his 4th victim. What are you going to do? Edmund asked. The execution is at dawn. You have hours, not days. The stranger looked towards the jailhouse, then back at the knife in his hand. I'm going to give Silas Blackwood a choice. Return Arabella's ranch to her, or face the consequences himself. And if he refuses? The stranger's expression hardened. Then he'll learn that some men can't be bought, not with money, not with power, not with fear. He turned to leave, but Edmund called out, Be careful. Silas has friends in high places. He won't go down without a fight. The stranger paused. Neither will Arabella. He mounted his horse and rode toward the Blackwood ranch once more, this time with purpose. The moon was high now, casting long shadows across the land. The closer he got, the more he noticed details that didn't add up. Fresh wagon tracks, men moving about with purpose. Something was happening. As he approached the house, he saw Silas Blackwood standing on the porch, talking to 2 men in dark suits. They weren't local. The stranger recognized the type. Hired guns. Silas saw him too. His face went pale, then hardened with anger. He said something to the men, then walked down the steps toward the stranger. You shouldn't be here, Silas said, his voice tight. Not tonight. Not ever. I'm here for Arabella, the stranger said, his hand resting near his holster. And for the truth about what really happened to your business partner. Silas laughed, but it sounded forced. The truth is she's a murderer, about to get what she deserves. The stranger pulled the knife from his pocket. Is this the truth? Your initials carved into the handle of the murder weapon? Silas's face went pale. That's not mine. Someone planted it, trying to frame me. The stranger took a step forward. You've done this before. 3 other ranchers, each one framed for murder. Each one lost their land to you. Silas's eyes darted toward his hired guns, then back to the stranger. You have no proof. I have enough, the stranger said. Enough to make sure you never hurt another innocent person again. Silas reached for his own weapon. Get off my property. Now. The stranger didn't move. Return Arabella's ranch to her, and I'll walk away. Refuse, and you'll face the consequences. Silas hesitated, then lowered his hand slightly. What consequences? The kind that come when a man takes responsibility for his actions, the stranger said. The kind that come when justice isn't bought or stolen. The 2 hired guns moved closer, their hands near their holsters. Silas watched them, then back at the stranger. A slow smile spread across his face. You think you can stop me? Silas asked. You think one man can change what's already been set in motion? The stranger didn't answer. He just stood there, waiting. The red bandana around his neck seemed to glow in the moonlight, a promise of things to come. What happened next would change everything, and Silas Blackwood would soon learn that some men don't fear power. They fear justice. The stranger didn't flinch as Silas's hired guns moved closer, their hands rested on their holsters, fingers twitching. Silas watched them, a cruel smile spreading across his face. You think you can stop me? Silas taunted. You think one man can change what's already been set in motion? The stranger didn't answer. He just stood there, waiting. The red bandana around his neck seemed to glow in the moonlight, a promise of things to come. Suddenly shots rang out, not from the stranger but from the darkness beyond the porch. Silas's men dropped, clutching their chests. The stranger took advantage of the chaos, pulling his own weapon and firing at Silas. The bullet grazed Silas's shoulder, sending him stumbling backward. "Get out of here!" the stranger yelled, then turned and ran toward his horse, the evidence of Silas's guilt clutched tightly in his hand. He rode hard through the night, the wind whipping his face. The execution was scheduled for dawn. He had hours to expose the truth and save Arabella. But Silas would be coming after him now, with more men, with more determination. The stranger stopped at the edge of town, dismounting and tying his horse to a fence post. He needed a plan, something that couldn't be ignored, something that would force Silas to face what he'd done. He remembered Edmund's words about the 3 other ranchers. Silas had done this before. Each time, he'd framed an innocent person, taken their land, and gotten away with it. Until now. The stranger walked toward the town square, the gallows looming in the pre-dawn light. A crowd was already gathering, murmuring about the execution that would happen when the sun rose. He spotted Edmund near the saloon, looking nervous. The stranger approached him. "I need you to help me," the stranger said quietly. "When the time comes, you need to speak. Tell everyone what you saw." Edmund swallowed hard. "I'm scared. Silas has men everywhere." "The truth is your only protection," the stranger said, "and Arabella's only hope." As they spoke, a shadow fell over them. Silas Blackwood stood there, flanked by 4 armed men. His shoulder was bleeding, but his eyes burned with hatred. "I should have known you'd meddle," Silas spat, "but your meddling ends now." The stranger didn't move. He just looked at Silas, then at the knife in his hand. "The truth ends now, and you're going to face it." What happened next would change everything, and Silas Blackwood would soon learn that some men don't fear power. They fear justice. The sun was just breaking over the horizon, casting long shadows across the town square. Arabella Ashworth stood on the gallows platform, the noose around her neck. The sheriff adjusted it one last time, his face devoid of emotion. The crowd watched in silence, some with satisfaction, others with sorrow. No one spoke. No one moved. The stranger pushed through the crowd, his red bandana a stark contrast against the morning light. He walked directly toward the gallows, ignoring the sheriff's order to halt. "Stop right there!" Sheriff Weston shouted, hand resting on his holster. "This is an execution!" The stranger kept walking. He stopped at the base of the gallows steps, looking up at Arabella. "You don't deserve this." Silas Blackwood stepped forward, a smirk on his face. "She's a murderer. The evidence is clear. The trial was fair." The stranger reached into his pocket and pulled out the knife, the one with Silas's initials carved into the handle. He held it up for everyone to see. "This is the real murder weapon," the stranger said, "not the one you planted in Arabella's barn." Silas's face paled. "That's not mine. It's a fake." "Is it?" the stranger asked. "Edmund Cavendish recognized it. He saw you with it the night of the murder." Edmund pushed through the crowd, standing beside the stranger. "It's his knife. I saw him arguing with his business partner that night. I heard the gunshot. I ran when I saw Silas standing over the body." The crowd gasped. Whispers spread through the square. Sheriff Weston reached for his weapon, but Silas stopped him. "Don't be a fool, Tom," Silas said, his voice tight. "He's lying." "Am I?" Edmund asked, stepping forward. "What about the 3 other ranchers, Silas? The ones who disappeared or were executed before you took their land?" Silas's eyes darted around, looking for an escape. "That's ridiculous. You're making things up." The stranger took a step forward. "Return Arabella's ranch to her, now." Silas laughed, but it sounded forced. "Or what? You'll shoot me? In front of all these witnesses?" The stranger didn't answer. He just stood there, the knife in his hand like a promise of things to come. Suddenly, Silas pulled his own weapon and fired at the stranger. The bullet missed, hitting the gallows platform instead. Arabella stumbled, the noose tightening around her neck. The stranger reacted instantly, pulling his own weapon and firing back. Silas dropped to the ground, clutching his shoulder. The crowd scattered, screams filling the air. Arabella gasped, the rope cutting into her neck. The stranger rushed to the gallows, cutting her free as she collapsed into his arms. Silas watched from the ground, his face contorted with rage. "You think this is over? You think you've won?" The stranger helped Arabella to her feet, then turned to face Silas. "It's over for you. But for everyone else, justice is just beginning." What he would do next would change everything. And Silas Blackwood would soon learn that some crimes can't be buried, no matter how deep you dig. The sheriff finally found his voice. "Tom Weston, you're under arrest for corruption and obstruction of justice," he said, pulling out handcuffs. Two deputies moved to assist, their faces showing new resolve now that the truth was out. Silas struggled as they cuffed him, his face purple with rage. "This isn't over. I have friends in high places." "Your friends won't help you now," the stranger said. "Not when the truth is out." Arabella stood on solid ground for the first time in days, rubbing her neck where the rope had been. "My ranch," she said, her voice shaky but strong. "I want my ranch back." Silas laughed. "You'll never prove anything." The stranger pulled out the knife with Silas's initials. "This is proof, and Edmund's testimony, and the pattern of 3 other ranchers who disappeared after you framed them." Edmund stepped forward. "I'll testify. I saw everything that night." Silas's face went pale. "You can't prove it was me." The stranger walked over to Silas. "You have a choice. Confess publicly and return Arabella's ranch, or I'll make sure the whole territory knows what you've done." Silas glared at him, then at the growing crowd. "Fine. Yes, I killed my partner. I wanted his share of the ranch, and I framed Arabella because she wouldn't sell me hers." The sheriff nodded. "Write it down. Sign a confession." As Silas wrote his confession, the stranger helped Arabella collect her belongings from the jail. The townspeople watched in silence, no longer celebrating her impending death, but ashamed of their own silence. "You saved my life," Arabella said. The stranger just nodded. "Go home. Take back what's yours." Arabella smiled for the first time in weeks. "Thank you." The stranger turned and walked toward his horse, leaving the crowd and the aftermath behind him. He didn't look back. He didn't want thanks. He just wanted to do what was right. He mounted his horse and rode out of Cripple Creek, the red bandana around his neck flapping in the wind. Another town. Another injustice. Another job done. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Your support is what brings these stories to more people.